My best friend took her life after her boyfriend publicly humiliated her. I got revenge and destroyed his life. A year later, he's begging me to undo the damage, but I'm not done. Leah was my girl best friend that I actually saw as a friend. Boys, take notes. She was like my little sister. My mom loved her and would even try to set her up on dates with boys her age. She was so positive that she could make you laugh at any joke, even if they were terrible. And in 10th grade, she met Blake. Blake was on the varsity basketball team, had a Snapchat score of over 2 million, and only wore clothes that showed how muscular he was. When Leah started talking to him, she tried to convince me that it was ironic, but I knew by the glimmer in her eye that she liked him, and I knew that when all was said and done, I would be the one licking her wounds clean. So I tried to convince her otherwise, but instead of listening to me, she just started texting him in secret, renamed his contact name to Mom, hid me from her Instagram story as if I wouldn't notice. But then something changed. Leah was happy, like really happy. She stopped wearing makeup and stopped dyeing her hair all the time. It was clear that he made her feel special. They'd walk through hallways holding hands, and sometimes made out by the lockers. Fast forward to 4 months later, and they were still together, which meant it was Blake's longest relationship. By this point, everyone in the school was gossiping about them. Some girls even tried to test their relationship strength by sliding into his DMs. She was sleeping over at my house when he asked for intimate pictures. "Do you think I should?" she asked, her voice sheepish. When I read the texts, my stomach turned. "Darling, if you don't show me what's mine, then I'm gonna have to get off to that girl in my AP calculus class." Blake then proceeded to, in detail, describe how badly he wanted that girl, followed by how much of an amazing boyfriend he was for refraining. But before I could say anything, Leah ran into the bathroom and locked the door. I exhaled sharply, because I knew she had given in. When she came out, her face was all puffy from crying, but when I tried to ask if she was okay, she just turned off the light and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of her hyperventilating. Blake had blocked her on everything, and in school he was acting like she didn't exist. I didn't even have to say "I told you so," because it was obvious she already knew how dumb she was. But that night I was proven wrong, because he actually unblocked her on everything and apologized for being so immature. But as soon as she forgave him, he asked for pictures again. This time, the texts were even worse. "If you don't send more, I'll just drop the ones you already gave me into our team group chat and get them to rate you out of 10. He reblocked her on everything, and they never spoke again. Until a week later, that is. Because that's when Blake showed up to school with a gift. Plastered on every locker room door, hallway bulletin board, classroom whiteboard was a printed out photo of the photos she had sent. The girls were whispering. Guys were patting me on the back and congratulated me for getting a slice of Leah. Even some of the male teachers were ogling her, trying to look through her clothes as if they had X-ray vision. She immediately ran out to her car and drove home. For the entire month, Blake was known as the guy who bagged the baddest in the school. Meanwhile, Leah could barely even get out of bed. I tried to tell her there was nothing to be ashamed of, but she was too busy drowning in self-hatred to listen to me. And less than a month later, I was at her funeral, wearing the tie she once made fun of, because the shame was so suffocating that she thought the only way out was to take a handful of meds and abandon everything she loved. Blake was standing right across from me, with a smirk on his face, and when he thought no one was looking, he even showed his friend the photo that had started this entire thing. I was seeing red. That night, he hosted a party for her, and told everyone she was the Juliet to her Romeo, and even fate cried. I showed up at the very end, when he was plastered and everyone else had gone home. I asked him if he wanted a cigarette, and that fuckface nodded like an idiot. Suddenly, I found myself beating him until his skull was practically paint on the sidewalk. I then unlocked his phone and took a photo of him and plastered it onto all of his social media. Captioned, "Finally got what I deserve." Obviously, it got taken down pretty quickly, but not before the entire school had seen it. Lol. But teenage me forgot to account for one thing. Blake was rich, and it wasn't long before he taught me exactly how much power he had. 2 weeks. That's how long I was suspended from school. Blake's parents threatened to press charges, but Blake himself refused. At first, I thought maybe he felt guilty, but I was wrong. So wrong. He didn't want legal consequences. He wanted to handle this himself. When I came back to school, my locker had been trashed. Someone had dumped what smelled like spoiled milk inside. My bike tires were slashed in the rack outside, and my phone was blowing up with anonymous DMs saying things like, "Leah would still be alive if it weren't for you," and "You're next." I couldn't prove any of it was Blake, but the timing was too perfect. This was just the beginning of his revenge, and I had no idea how bad it was about to get. I knew Blake was behind the anonymous messages, but I couldn't prove it. The school administration was useless. When I went to the principal about my locker, he just shrugged and said, "These things happen." When I mentioned the DMS, he asked if I had any proof they were from Blake. I didn't. Blake was too smart for that. He used burner accounts, different phones, and always had an alibi. He was like a ghost, leaving destruction in his wake but never leaving fingerprints. The worst part was how he twisted everything. He started telling people I was obsessed with Leah, that I'd always been jealous of their relationship. According to his version, I attacked him because I couldn't handle that she chose him over me. Some people actually believed this garbage. I overheard Christine from my English class whispering to her friend, "I always thought there was something off about him." Her words stung like acid, especially since Christine had been friendly with me since freshman year. It was like watching my reputation dissolve in real time. The school counselor, Ms. Patel, started calling me in for weekly sessions. She never directly accused me of anything, but she asked a lot of questions about my anger issues and my feelings toward Leah. I could tell she was watching me for signs I might snap again. Her office became a place I dreaded. The small room with its motivational posters and box of tissues strategically placed within arm's reach, as if she expected me to break down at any moment. Even some teachers looked at me sideways. Mr. Hoffman, who used to love having me in his history class, now barely called on me. When I turned in assignments, he would take them with just his fingertips, like I was contaminated. Once, I stayed after class to ask about an essay, and he kept glancing at the door, as if planning an escape route. It was humiliating. I tried to keep my head down. I really did. I focused on my grades, stayed away from Blake, and tried to process my grief over Leah. Her parents invited me over for dinner sometimes. We'd look through old photos and share memories. Those nights were the only times I felt normal. Mrs. Martinez would make Leah's favorite enchiladas, and we'd sit around their kitchen table, the empty chair where Leah should have been like a black hole pulling at all of us. Sometimes her dad would tell stories that made us laugh, and for a split second, it felt like she might walk through the door at any moment. About a month after I returned to school, I decided to apply for the Leah Martinez Memorial Scholarship. Her parents had set it up to help a student attend the art school Leah had dreamed dreamed of going to. I worked on my application for weeks, writing about our friendship and what she meant to me. I poured everything into that essay. Our childhood adventures, our shared dreams, the way she could always make me laugh even on my worst days. It felt like the one way I could honor her memory properly. The day before the deadline, I got called to the guidance office. Ms. Patel was sitting there with the scholarship committee chair, both looking uncomfortable. The air in the room felt thick, charged with unspoken accusations. "We received your application," the chair said, sliding a folder across the desk, "but there seems to be a problem." I opened it and felt my stomach drop. Someone had already submitted an application in my name, one that included screenshots of messages where I trashed Leah, calling her desperate and pathetic for sending those photos to Blake. The messages were obviously fake, but they looked real enough to raise doubts. They had my profile picture, my username, even mimicked the way I typed. The attention to detail was chilling. "I didn't write these," I said, my voice cracking. "Someone's setting me up." Ms. Patel gave me that look, the one that says she wants to believe me but doesn't quite. The application was flagged for fraud, and I was told I could no longer apply. I knew exactly who was behind it, but again, I had no proof. Walking out of that office, I spotted Blake down the hall, surrounded by his basketball buddies. He caught my eye and smirked. Not an obvious grin, just a slight upturn of his lips that only I would notice. He was enjoying this. His eyes held that same cold amusement they had when he'd shown me Leah's photos. Like watching people suffer was entertainment for him. Things got weirder after that. I started feeling watched all the time. I'd be sitting in the cafeteria, and my phone would buzz with a notification that someone had screenshotted my Instagram story from 10 minutes ago. I'd get texts referencing conversations I'd had in private. Once, I mentioned to my mom that I was thinking about cutting my hair, and the next day someone had photoshopped a picture of me with a ridiculous buzz cut and circulated it around school. One day, I was talking to my lab partner Evelyn about how I was thinking of skipping prom, and the next morning, there was a poll on someone's Finsta asking, should losers who hit up popular guys be allowed at prom? The timing wasn't coincidental. Evelyn looked at me strangely in class that day, like she was wondering if I'd somehow seen the poll and was blaming her. I got paranoid. I stopped talking to people, started skipping classes. My grades tanked. My mom noticed and tried to help, but I couldn't explain what was happening without sounding crazy. How do you tell your mom that the guy whose face you smashed in is now psychologically torturing you? She was already worried enough, tiptoeing around me like I might explode at any moment, checking my room when she thought I wasn't looking, probably for substances or weapons or whatever parents fear most. I spiraled, started having nightmares about Leah. In them, she was always disappointed in me, telling me I'd made everything worse. Sometimes she'd be standing at the edge of a cliff, and no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't reach her before she stepped off. I'd wake up sweating, checking my phone to make sure no one had hacked it while I slept. Dark circles formed under my eyes. I lost weight. My mom started making doctor's appointments I refused to attend. Then I found the account. It was a burner on Instagram called Truth Teller HS that had been posting details about my life, screenshots of my therapy sessions with Ms. Patel, notes about my absences, even drafts from my private social media that I'd never posted. There were photos of me walking to my car after school, sitting alone at lunch, even one of me through my bedroom window. The invasion of privacy made my skin crawl. I started keeping my blinds closed at all times, checking over my shoulder constantly. The account only had about 50 followers, but they were all people from school. The comments were brutal. No wonder Leah culled herself rather than deal with this psycho. Someone should check his basement for bodies. Bet he keeps her pictures for himself. Each comment felt like a knife twisting deeper. The worst part was seeing names I recognized, people I'd considered friends, or at least friendly acquaintances, joining in on the cruelty. I reported the account, but Instagram said it didn't violate their guidelines. Of course it was Blake. It had to be. But he was careful. Nothing directly linked to him. He was smart about it, never using his own devices, probably getting his friends to help. The popular kids formed a protective circle around him, providing alibis, sharing access to their accounts, making it impossible to pin anything on him specifically, until he slipped up. One night, a new post appeared, a photo taken from across the street from my house, showing me through the living room window watching TV with my mom. The caption read, "Mommy's boy planning their next victim." The implication that my mom was somehow involved in my psychotic behavior made my blood boil. She'd been my only real support through all of this, but there was something in the corner of the photo, a shadow, someone standing there taking the picture. I downloaded it, enhanced it in a photo editor, and zoomed in. There was a sleeve visible, a varsity jacket, number 32, Blake's number. The red and gold trim was unmistakable. I'd seen that jacket countless times in the hallways, draped over Leah's shoulders when they were together, worn like a badge of honor by the school's star athlete. I saved the evidence, but didn't confront him right away. I needed to be smarter this time. No more impulsive violence. That's what he wanted, for me to snap again so he could play the victim. I'd already fallen into that trap once, and it had cost me nearly everything. This time, I had to be strategic. Instead, I waited until I saw him alone in the hallway between classes. I walked up casually, making sure we were in a blind spot away from cameras. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face neutral, my hands visible and relaxed at my sides. "Nice jacket," I said quietly. "Looks good in photos." His face twitched, just slightly. "What are you talking about, psycho? I know about the account. I have proof it's you." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're spiraling, man. Maybe you should up your meds. You're not the first person to fall apart over me," he added, leaning in close, his breath hot on my face. "And you won't be the last." What Blake didn't know was that my phone was recording in my pocket. Not enough to prove he was behind everything, but enough to show he was messing with me. It was a start. I could hear the slight tremor in his voice, the hint of nervousness beneath his bravado. He wasn't as untouchable as he thought. I realized I needed to play the long game. Blake had resources and popularity on his side. I had nothing except the truth, and no one wanted to hear it. I needed allies. Someone else who knew what Blake was capable of, who might be willing to stand with me against him. That's when I remembered Maddie Chen. She'd dated Blake briefly before Leah, and there were rumors he'd dumped her suddenly too. I'd noticed how she always seemed to tense up when he entered a room, how she'd find excuses to leave if he sat at her lunch table. I found her in the library during study hall and asked if we could talk. She was hunched over a textbook, her long dark hair creating a curtain between her and the rest of the world. At first, she was hesitant. "I don't want any drama," she said, not meeting my eyes. Her fingers nervously played with the corner of her book page, folding and unfolding it. "Neither do I told her. "I just want to know if he did the same thing to you that he did to Leah." Her face went pale. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, then nodded slightly. "He asked for pictures. I sent them. Then he started threatening to share them if I didn't send more. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but I could hear the shame and fear in it. Did he follow through? No, she whispered. I kept sending what he wanted until he got bored and moved on. I was too scared to say no. She finally looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I never told anyone, not even my best friends. I told her what happened to Leah, the full story. By the end, she was crying silently. I should have said something. Maybe if I had. It's not your fault, I said. It's his, and he's still doing it. He's behind that truth teller account. Maddie wasn't surprised. He did something similar when Jonathan Cortez tried to call him out last year. Somehow got access to his college applications and sabotaged them. Jonathan's parents even hired a lawyer, but they couldn't prove it was Blake. Will you help me? I asked. Not for revenge, for justice, for Leah. She thought about it for a long time before nodding. What do you need? We started collecting evidence. Maddie reached out to 2 other girls Blake had dated, and they shared similar stories. One had screenshots of threats he'd sent. Another had recordings of calls where he'd pressured her for photos. None of them had come forward because they were afraid of exactly what had happened to Leah. Public humiliation. They met with us secretly, in coffee shops 2 towns over, or in empty classrooms after school. Each girl's story was slightly different, but the pattern was unmistakable. Brenda, a junior who'd dated Blake for just 3 weeks, showed us texts where he'd threatened to tell everyone she was frigid if she didn't send him photos. Elizabeth, a quiet senior who'd barely spoken to anyone since her breakup with Blake last year, revealed how he'd systematically isolated her from friends, demanding constant proof of her whereabouts and loyalty. I gathered all the evidence of the harassment I'd been experiencing, the anonymous messages, the truth teller posts, timestamps that showed Blake was always nearby when new content appeared. It wasn't conclusive, but it was building a pattern. We created a shared document, organizing everything chronologically, noting similarities in language and tactics. Maddie suggested we leak everything anonymously to a massive group chat where half the school was included. We created a burner account called Blake's Victims and dropped everything at once. Screenshots, stories, audio messages, the evidence from my phone. We made sure to blur any sensitive content and focus only on Blake's behavior. We worked on it for hours in Maddie's basement, carefully redacting names and identifying details of the victims while highlighting Blake's manipulation tactics. The reaction was immediate. People were shocked. Not everyone believed it, of course. Blake's close friends defended him, calling it a smear campaign, but others started connecting dots. Girls who had received similar messages from Blake started speaking up in the chat. Guys who had seen him brag about his collection confirmed parts of our story. The chat exploded with hundreds of messages, some supportive, others skeptical, but all of them engaged. Blake's carefully constructed image started crumbling. Coaches benched him to protect the team's image while they looked into the allegations. People stopped high-fiving him in the hallway. His girlfriend Amber publicly broke up with him on social media, saying she couldn't be associated with someone who treated women that way. I saw him in the hallway, looking confused and angry, like he couldn't believe his actions were finally catching up to him. For a few days, I actually felt hopeful. Maybe there would be justice for Leah after all. Maybe Blake would finally face consequences. I even slept through the night for the first time in months, without nightmares or cold sweats. Then Maddie called me, hysterical. Someone had egged her car and keyed the word SLAT into the paint. There was a USB drive left on her windshield. When we plugged it in, we found edited screenshots making it look like Maddie and I were blackmailing Blake for money, threatening to make up stories about him if he didn't pay. The screenshots were convincing. Our profile pictures, our writing styles, even references to real conversations we'd had that someone must have been monitoring. He's trying to flip the script, I realized. If he can't hurt us physically, he'll destroy our credibility. The next day, those fake screenshots started circulating. Some people who had been supportive now looked at us suspiciously. Blake walked around with a smug expression, playing the victim. He even went to the principal, claiming he was being harassed and extorted. He had his father with him, a tall, imposing man in an expensive suit who sat on the school board and donated generously to the athletic department every year. I was called into the office again. This time, the principal wasn't just dismissive, he was hostile. These are serious allegations, he said, showing me the fake screenshots. If these are real, you could be facing expulsion and criminal charges. His tone made it clear which side he was already on. They're not real, I insisted. Blake edited them. He's trying to cover up what he did to Leah and these other girls. Do you have proof these are fake? I didn't. Not yet. That night, Maddie and I met at a coffee shop off campus. We needed a new strategy. The small cafe was nearly empty, just a couple of college students with laptops and an elderly man reading a newspaper. We chose a corner table, speaking in hushed voices. We need to hit him at his own game, Maddie said. He's good at manipulation and tech stuff, but he's sloppy when he's angry. How do we make him angry enough to slip up without putting ourselves in danger? I asked, stirring my untouched coffee. Maddie thought for a moment. What if we expose how badly he edited those screenshots? If we can prove he fabricated evidence, no one will believe anything he says. I spent the entire weekend analyzing the fake screenshots, looking for inconsistencies. Finally, I found them. Subtle differences in font sizes, slight misalignments in text bubbles, timestamps that didn't match up with our phone records. I created a detailed breakdown showing exactly how they'd been tampered with. I hadn't slept much, but the adrenaline kept me going. This felt like our last chance, but we needed more. Through some digging, we discovered Blake had appeared on his friend's Twitch stream the exact night the fake screenshots were supposedly created. In the background of the video, you could actually see his computer screen for a split second, with Photoshop open and what looked like message templates. It was blurry but recognizable if you knew what you were looking for. We compiled everything and posted it from the Blake's Victims account. The fake screenshots side by side with proof they were edited, the Twitch stream timestamp, everything. We titled it How to Frame Someone 101, a Blake Peterson tutorial. It worked better than we expected. People who had been on the fence were now firmly against Blake. His remaining friends started distancing themselves. The basketball coach called him in for a meeting. Even teachers who had given him the benefit of the doubt were now looking at him differently. I overheard two of them whispering in the hallway, one saying, "I always thought he was too perfect. Should have known." Blake was cornered, and we knew that made him dangerous. He started lashing out, making threats to anyone he suspected of being behind the Blake's Victims account. He showed up at Maddie's house one night, pounding on the door until her parents threatened to call the police. The next day, she came to school with dark circles under her eyes, jumping at every loud noise. We needed one final piece of evidence, something undeniable that would end this once and for all. Maddie came up with the plan. "He doesn't know we're working together," she said. "He thinks I'm just another girl spreading rumors." messages. What if I reach out to him pretending to be on his side? It was risky, but it might work. Maddie texted Blake from a new number, pretending to be a sophomore named Jamie, who admired him and thought he was being treated unfairly. She was flirty, sympathetic, exactly the kind of ego boost Blake needed right now. She showed me the messages, carefully crafting each response to draw him in without being too obvious. He took the bait. They texted for days, with Maddie slowly gaining his trust. She asked innocent questions about the rumors, expressing disbelief that anyone would make up such horrible things about him. She played to his vanity, his sense of victimhood, his belief that he was untouchable. When Blake thought he was safe, he started bragging, first in vague terms, then more specifically. He admitted to having a system for getting girls to send him pictures. He talked about how some girls need to be put in their place. He even mentioned Leah by name, saying she couldn't handle the game. The casual cruelty in his words made me sick. Maddie recorded everything, not just Leah, but a handful of other girls too. All documented, all in his own words. The evidence was damning. Blake describing in detail how he manipulated girls, threatened them, shared their private photos as trophies with his closest friends. We didn't just post these recordings online. We sent them directly to the people who needed to hear them. Blake's girlfriend, his basketball coach, his dad who was on the school board, and the university liaison who had been considering him for a sports scholarship. We included a note explaining that this wasn't about revenge, but about protecting future victims. I needed to be careful with my next steps. The last thing I wanted was for Blake to realize how much evidence we'd gathered. We had to strike at exactly the right moment, when he wouldn't have time to spin some new lie or create more fake screenshots. We need to make sure these recordings get to everyone at once, I told Maddie as we sat in her car in the school parking lot. If Blake gets wind of what's happening too early, he'll try to get ahead of it. Maddie nodded, her eyes darting nervously around the parking lot like she expected Blake to appear at any moment. I've got the email addresses for Coach Daniels and the university scout. Can you handle his dad and Amber? I nodded. Blake's dad was on the school board, which made this tricky, but I'd found his business email on the school website, and Amber's Instagram had her contact info right in her bio. We agreed to send everything simultaneously at exactly 8 p.m. that night when we knew Blake would be at basketball practice. That would give all the recipients time to process what they were hearing before Blake could try to damage control. The rest of the school day dragged on forever. I kept checking my phone, making sure the audio files were still there, that nothing had corrupted. I caught Blake staring at me a couple times in the hallway, this smug look on his face like he thought he'd won, if only he knew what was coming. When I got home, I locked myself in my room and double-checked everything one last time. The recordings were crystal clear, Blake's voice unmistakable as he bragged about his system for manipulating girls, how he kept their photos as trophies, how Leah couldn't handle the game. Hearing him talk about her like that made my blood boil all over again, but I forced myself to stay focused. At 7:55 p.m., Maddie texted me, "Ready?" I replied with a thumbs up emoji and took a deep breath. At exactly 8 p.m., I hit send on 2 separate emails, one to Blake's dad and one to Amber. Each contained the audio files, a brief explanation, and a note clarifying this wasn't about revenge, but about protecting future victims. I included links to resources about digital harassment and revenge peer in-laws. I wanted this to be about justice, not just getting back at Blake. Maddie texted me a minute later, "Done. Now we wait." The waiting was torture. I couldn't sleep that night, just kept checking my phone for any response. Nothing came through until 6:30 the next morning. A text from Maddie. "Amber just posted that she's single. It's starting." I checked Instagram and sure enough, Amber had changed her relationship status and posted a long message about trusting your gut and not letting anyone treat you like an option. She didn't mention Blake by name, but everyone would know who she was talking about. The comments were already flooding in, people asking what happened, offering support. When I got to school, the atmosphere was different. People were huddled in small groups whispering. Blake wasn't at his usual spot by the senior lockers. I spotted Amber surrounded by her friends, her eyes red like she'd been crying. When she saw me, she gave me a small nod. I nodded back, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. By second period, rumors were flying. Blake had been called to the coach's office. His dad had shown up at school looking furious. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone could sense something big was going down. I kept my head down, trying not to draw attention to myself. This wasn't about me getting credit. It was about the truth finally coming out. During lunch, Maddie slid into the seat across from me, her eyes wide. "Coach kicked him off the team," she whispered. "Like, permanently. They're taking his jersey down from the display case right now." I glanced across the cafeteria where Blake's basketball buddies were sitting, looking uncomfortable and confused. Their golden boy was falling, and they didn't know how to process it. The school held an emergency disciplinary meeting. Blake was expelled the following day. His father, for once, didn't try to buy his way out of it. The recordings had made it impossible to defend him. The basketball team removed his jersey from their display case. His college prospects evaporated overnight. The carefully constructed future he'd been planning crumbled in a matter of hours. The day after Blake's expulsion, I walked into school wearing the same blue tie I'd worn to Leah's funeral. Same color shirt too. I didn't say anything dramatic or make a speech. I just went to class, head held high for the first time in months. The whispers followed me, but they were different now. Respectful, almost apologetic. In the hallway, Evelyn from my biology class stopped me. "Do you feel better now?" she asked. "Now that he's gone?" I thought about Leah, about her laugh and her terrible jokes and our Sunday slushies, about how none of this brought her back, about the empty chair at her parents' dinner table that would never be filled again. "Not better," I said quietly. "Just done." That afternoon, I visited Leah's grave for the first time since the funeral. I brought a blue raspberry slushie and sat there telling her everything that had happened. I'd like to think she was listening, that maybe she felt some peace knowing Blake couldn't hurt anyone else the way he hurt her. The cemetery was quiet, except for the rustling of leaves and distant traffic. I stayed until the slushie melted, leaving a blue stain on the grass. As I was leaving the cemetery, my phone buzzed with a text from Maddie. "Blake's parents are sending him to some boarding school in Vermont. He's gone for good." I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected, just a hollow kind of closure. Blake was gone, but so was Leah. Nothing would ever make that right. The next day at school was strange. People kept coming up to me, telling me how sorry they were for not believing me sooner, for not standing up for Leah. Some of them were the same people who had laughed at those photos on the bulletin boards. Their apologies felt too little, too late, but I nodded and accepted them anyway. What else could I do? Ms. Patel called me into her office again, but this time it was different. "The scholarship committee wants to speak with you," she said. "They're reopening applications." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I think you have a good chance. A week later, I received the Leah Martinez Memorial Scholarship. At the small ceremony, Leah's parents hugged me tight. Her mom whispered, she would be so proud of you for not giving up. Mr. Martinez had tears in his eyes as he handed me the certificate, his hand squeezing mine firmly. I'm not sure if that's true. Part of me thinks Leah would have just wanted everyone to move on, to remember her for her laugh and her kindness, not for how she died or what Blake did. But I do know she would have wanted other girls to be safe from guys like him. The truth teller account disappeared. The anonymous messages stopped. Life at school slowly returned to something resembling normal. I still missed Leah every day, still brought slushies to the old playground on Sundays sometimes, just to sit on the swings and remember. Sometimes Maddie would join me, and we'd talk about Leah, keeping her memory alive in the way she deserved to be remembered. That summer, before heading off to college, I helped Leah's parents organize her room. Mrs. Martinez couldn't bring herself to do it alone, and Mr. Martinez kept breaking down every time he tried. We sorted through her clothes, her books, her collection of weird keychains from every place she'd ever visited. I found the matching friendship bracelet to the one she'd made me in 8th grade, still in her jewelry box. Mrs. Martinez insisted I take it. She'd want you to have it, she said, closing my fingers around the braided threads. I wore it every day after that, a small reminder of the friend I'd lost, and the promise I'd made to myself that her story wouldn't be forgotten. Not the tragic ending, but all the chapters that came before. The laughter, the slushies, the terrible jokes, the unwavering loyalty. When I left for college that fall, I took the scholarship money and the memories and the determination to make sure what happened to Leah didn't happen to anyone else. I joined a student group working on digital consent awareness. I shared Leah's story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder of what's at stake when we fail to protect each other. I still think about Blake sometimes, wondering if he learned anything from all this, or if he's just gotten better at hiding who he really is. I hope for the former, but suspect the latter. People like him rarely change completely, but I've changed. I'm more cautious now, more aware of how quickly things can spiral out of control. I'm also more determined to speak up when something feels wrong, even when it would be easier to stay silent. Last week, I got a text from Maddie. She's at a different college, but we still keep in touch. Saw this and thought of you, she wrote, with a photo attached. It was a blue raspberry slushie in a convenience store cup. I smiled, took a screenshot, and saved it to my phone. Some days are harder than others. Some days I still get angry thinking about everything that happened. But most days, I just try to live in a way that would make Leah proud. Not because I owe it to her, or because I feel guilty for not saving her, but because she taught me what real friendship looks like, and that's something worth honoring.